When you land that Sprint account,
Yeah.
was there, I mean, that has come with a tremendous amount of pressure because now you've gotten it,
was
but now you
unbelievable.
have to deliver on it.
Unbelievable. I can remember driving home from location scouting. We shot up at this place. I can't remember its name, but you've seen it in a bunch of commercials. We all have. It's up like way up in Lancaster or whatever. It's like a little diner. And I can just remember, like, I'm driving back. I've got to make the production book. Like, I'm trying to get the money in advance, but I don't have it all. So I'm maxing credit cards to make this thing happen. Like, it was, and I remember I had a migraine and I'm like driving at night, listening to the king of wishful thinking, throwing up in a cup. I'm the king of wishful.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi. Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
My next guest grew up in Kansas City watching direct response television. After graduating from Azusa Pacific with a communications degree, he freelanced at IATSE Local 493, where he gained vital advertising production experience producing direct response commercials for several KC agencies. In 2012, he moved to LA. Within a few months, he was hired by the #1 independent podcasting advertising agency, where he works with mega brands such as HelloFresh, Oracle, and Tommy John. Please welcome the Vice President of Creative Services for Oxford Road and the host of Ad Infinitum, Stew Redwine. Stew, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And congratulations on your KC Chief win last night.
Oh, it's, it makes my dad and my mom are massive fans. I'm not as much of a sports guy myself, but seeing how happy they are and seeing the Chiefs win so much, it's awesome.
I'm sure it's gratifying. And
very much.
It's now officially a dynasty. 3 out of the last 5. That's incredibly impressive.
Completely.
Yeah. And I think I've never been to Kansas City, but I've heard wonderful things about it. And it sounds like football there in a lot of ways is a religion.
Oh, complete. What else is there to do?
Well, there is some barbecue, I've heard. Some really good barbecue.
There is very good barbecue, yes. Yeah. And that's, it's been fun with Ted Lasso, them shining a light on Kansas City a little bit.
That's
and then,
right.
Actually, Arthur Bryant's is one of the barbecue joints that they highlight in the show. And that's my favorite.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
I've heard the references, obviously, in Ted Lasso, and I've never been. It's definitely on my bucket list to go, because I have heard, as far as Midwest cities go, it's a great city.
And I will tell you this, there's a cool little advertising museum. It's like you got to know somebody that knows somebody to go there. But what's fascinating about Kansas City is its advertising history. If you go back in time before the airplane, right, people had to get from one side of the continent on land, obviously. So you stop along the way. Cities were building up along the way. Kansas City used to be called the Paris of the Plains. There was a lot built up there before it all became flyover country.
I had no idea.
With that said, there was a ton of momentum. One of these advertising agencies is Bernstein Rain. And as I was coming up, you were reading about how I watched direct response television. I did. I also worked on direct response commercials. I didn't know that's what they were, because there was still this advertising industry there, because Bernstein Rain had McDonald's and Walmart.
Wow.
Yes, like all through the opulent 80s all the way up into the 2000s. Like Bernstein Rain invented the Happy Meal. So there's such a rich history. One of the folks involved in all of that built their own private little advertising museum. So if you ever head down there, it's like you got to, like I said, it's like you got to know somebody. And they're like, yeah, we'll unlock it. We'll let you in.
That's great.
And you can check it out. They got like a big Tony the Tiger statue, all this cool stuff.
Oh, I had no idea that KC was a hub of advertising.
Like a pre-airplane,
Super, super cool.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about growing up there. Were your parents in advertising at all?
No, my folks were not in advertising. My dad was a consultant, and my mom was able to stay back home with us. I always liked making stuff, performing and that kind of thing. And there's a guy that I knew growing up whose name is Mike Schreiber that worked in advertising. I remember having a conversation with him. It's like you look back on your life and you can see the trajectory that kind of bounced you into play. So like I said, like I'm doing all this stuff, and I always kind of had a penchant for behind the scenes, like setting up the lights in the stands. Well, there were some production companies in Kansas City that what they happened to do was direct response television. But like I said, I didn't know what that was. But I came up and I'm working on their sets, selling gold coins or baseball hats with a flashlight in the bill and that kind of a thing. And I look back and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Like it's all led. Now it looks like a straight line. Didn't feel like a straight line at the time.
And so how did you get your first gig working on the set of one of these DR commercials?
Okay, so I was doing some performance stuff in Kansas City with a nonprofit. So I was all over the place. That's what I was always doing. Like I'm either on stage or I'm setting up lights or whatever. One of those guys was also a freelance camera guy. He's probably 20 years older than me. And so he started giving me I was like, I want to do more of this stuff, right? I'm working on Sundays at churches, at mega churches, like operating the cameras. And he gave me some numbers to call. Well, you should call this guy or you should call that guy. Or I just looked people up. As Paddock Productions is the company in Kansas City. And the big piece of advice, I wrote some notes down in advance. It's this guy, Scott Jolly. Scott's like, basically a black book and get the numbers of the producers or whoever it is and call them every couple weeks. I think the best advice he gave me was to be reaching out a lot, reaching out frequently to the same people. They didn't mind. I hear from younger folks sometimes I'll be bothering them or whatever. It's like, dude, they have so much going on. No, what you're going to be doing is staying top of mind. So I really credit it to Scott Jolly for helping me build out that initial network and then give me that approach of going, hey, have your 10 numbers. It'll grow to 14, 15, and call them regularly.
That's a great advice. And at that point, you're doing a little bit of everything. You've got some lighting experience, director of doing some photography, some editing, producing, just kind of a jack of all trades on the set.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I've been doing so much for so long with so little, I didn't know how to do anything any different. Because I loved it. I just wanted to be around it.
Got it. In that part of your career, though, you're really dealing with the production, the making of versus the creative aspect. It's all creative, but the creative in terms of actually helping develop the strategy.
Spot on. Exactly. And I can remember I was on a set at RSVP Productions out in Lee Summit doing a Big O tires commercial. And I'm one of the swing guys because back there, like I said, I was IATSE, Local 493.
Right.
So anyway, we did it all. Kansas City's small, so it's like Grip Electric was how we even referred to it. So you're doing all of it. So anyway, I'm there and we're filming the deal. And I remember during the day, like I'm watching the directors, they're cool. I'm like, man, maybe one day I could be like those guys. And then I looked over here and there's a guy sitting on a big leather couch on a laptop. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And then I look at Mel Graham, who's a Grip Electric guy that taught me tons of stuff. He's 2 times my age, at least, I guess, at that time. It's crazy to think of that. And he's lifting all the same heavy objects I am, right? So I'm like, if I do this for 20 more years, I'll still be, he has to get off the lift gate just like me with the bags and the cable. And I look over at the guy on the laptop and I'm like, he's going plink, plonk, plink, plonk. And then at the end of the day, we're shooting and they've shot all day. And he's like, oh, this is great. Hey, John, do you have any notes? And he gets up and he's like, yeah, this is great. I love that. The dance thing you guys just did now. Hey, can you just do one more? Like we were tight on the spokesperson at this point, okay? Right. So you can imagine they've shot everything. Hey, can you you guys just do one just like it's in the script. And then the guys, these young guys from Lawrence, Kansas, they do one just like in the script. And he's like, great, well, another like that, safety like that, just like in the script. The guy just goes, perfect. I think we got what we need. And you can hear everything that's going on in there. But that's where, when I think back, that's where the light hit. I'm like, okay, I can either keep lifting the stuff or I can figure out how to be the guy that goes plink, plunk, plunk and get up and give a couple notes at the end of the day and call it good. Not from a place of like not wanting to work, but it was just going, okay, what?
I get it.
How does he get there? How does that guy get there? And it is a ton of hard work.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then once you made that decision, how did you figure out what the next steps were?
Same kind of thing. That's a great question. How did I figure out? I can just remember like any of the jobs I had never done until I had done them.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of saying, like, there's an old Teddy Roosevelt quote that if you want to open a fish market, you've got to steal a couple fish. It's basically me going to Mike Churchill, who's a producer guy that only ever hired me to do X, to go like, hey, I've been shooting some stuff. Can I show you some stuff that I've shot? And I'll come do your corporate thing for, instead of $5,000, I'll do it. I got my own camera. I'll come do it for $1,000.
Right.
Or if you just cover my bubble and like just that kind of thing of going, give it away, get a few clients and then.
Sure. And it sounds like this was a great learning ground for you, and you may not have gotten that experience here because in KC, being a smaller market, even though you were doing a fair amount of production there, you got to do it all. Where here in LA, and I might be wrong by saying this, but maybe you would get pigeonholed into just lighting, for instance.
Completely. That's completely what happened. And because it's a little bit more complicated. I've come and gone from California a couple times, but the point is that it stuck with me that guys that I had worked with 20 years ago, I guess it would have been now, where I was shooting, like we were doing stuff for McGuire's, the car cleaning stuff we did. Yeah. So this was like when it was like, we need a bunch of content for the web. So it was cool. It was a cool gig. Like we did a ton of commercials, but I was the camera guy. They're calling it director of photography, but It was for this web stuff. But it was interesting that then I go back to the Midwest for a bit. And then when I came back, the pigeonholing is what I'm getting to. It was like, well, Stu, I thought you're a camera, you're a DP. Like you shoot that, like that's what you do. Where to your point in Kansas City, it's way more wide open. There's way less of the pigeonholing.
When you decided to come here in 2012, that was the last time.
That's the last time.
Last time. So you decided, at this point, do you have kids?
We did. Yeah.
You did.
Yes.
It's a big move. What made you decide I'm going to pick up? Because when you came out here, you didn't have a gig, correct?
I had only done some just freelance stuff.
So you decided you're going to pick it up, leave KC, come back to LA, bring the family. Is your wife supportive?
Completely.
Okay.
I got a lot of counsel from older guys that I trusted. That like one of them is Austin, a Steadicam operator, Steve Frakel. He's like, well, Stu, you're going to do the math and you're going to tell yourself it's going to cost you twice as much to live in California. It's going to cost you 3 times as much.
That's a great
and
point.
that's been true. You also get to make more.
Right.
And then some other guys that were like, look, your kids are young enough. Like go hard for 5 years. Cause my kids would have been like, I guess, I don't know, 2 and 3 and 3 and 4, somewhere right in there.
Okay.
And then my wife is fully supportive to go like, okay, let's go once more into the breach. Cause I hear there's gold in them there hills. And it's a larger market and all that. And I did have some relationships. And so we went for it, but I had guidance of it wasn't just like jump and the net will appear. Like I had made some inroads, was getting some good work and had those older guys that are giving me guidance of like, it's okay. You can go as hard as you can for 2 to 5 years. And if you got to come back, come back.
Got it. And at this point, it's kind of feast or fathom where it can be really. I've got a friend who's a gang boss, and he works on a lot of commercial sets, but they're in charge of the transportation. So getting all the rigs in, all the lighting trucks, all the catering trucks. If there's a celebrity on the set, he's in charge of getting that person in and out. And he'll either be incredibly busy or it's just crickets.
Totally. And I remember renting some equipment for one of these like E&G or corporate type jobs, which was a lot of what I did, like stuff for National Geographic or Kiewit Energy, like you name it, the NFL, the Major League Baseball. One of those guys just swinging around a camera. I was renting some stuff from a guy. I think it's here in Burbank, but I was telling him kind of basically what I just told you, but it's like, this is like 2012. And he's like, well, it's good you got a couple of kids. He goes, I wish I would have had a couple of kids when I first came out here, even though it wasn't my first time out here, but whatever. His point was like, they're going to make you fight like the Dickens to provide. And I was writing copy for websites selling like, what was it? It was like yerba mate or something for like $1 a word or pennies a word. Like not sure if the bank account's going to clear, doing whatever stressful. I had to. Because I have them under my arms.
You got to feed your family.
Where before when I didn't, it's interesting. I didn't fight as hard.
It makes a tremendous amount of sense. I don't have kids, but I have heard that over and over again where if it's just you that you're in charge of, you're like, it's okay. I can eat the ramen. Or,
exactly.
I don't mind if I'm living in a crummy place, but you want the best for your children. So you're going to work that much harder. At this point, when you're in LA in 2012, are you still doing a little bit of everything? Or are you really now working on the creative side or focused on that more so than ever?
Yeah, it's cool going through this with you. Yes, I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, that is what was happening. So it initially started out just that I was able to sell bigger work. So part of what I was able to do in Kansas City and then coming out here is talk to people and convince them to, like, I remember we did $250,000 video production for Sprint, for their retail stores. I'd never done something alone on my own like that. And, you know, from my kitchen table in our little apartment when we first moved out here, but I was able to sell through
That's a huge account.
Yeah, it was massive.
And so was there like an RFP, or how does that process work?
Relationships and, just the relationships that I built. And then also I've come to find from doing this work out here that for Midwestern agencies, and I think even out here, there's a vacation element to it. Let's be honest. Like, they could shoot there, they can come out here, and it can be cool.
Oh, I never thought of that.
We're going to shoot out on PCH. And
Sure.
And why is this a good idea? And this is how we're going to do it. I mean, you know, just convincing them that it's a good idea. And then, man, I can just remember it was crazy. I was maxing out credit cards, like the whole deal. Seriously.
When you land that Sprint account, that has come with a tremendous amount of pressure, because now you've gotten it, but now you have to deliver on it.
Unbelievable. I can remember driving home from location scouting. We shot up at this place. I can't remember its name, but you've seen it in a bunch of commercials. We all have. It's up, like way up in Lancaster or whatever. It's like a little diner. And I can just remember, like, I'm driving back. I've got to make the production book. Like, I'm trying to get the money in advance, but I don't have it all. So I'm maxing credit cards to make this thing happen. Like, it was, and I remember I had a migraine, and I'm like driving at night, listening to the King of Wishful Thinking, throwing up in a cup. I'm the king of wishful. So there you go. That's a snapshot.
I'm such a product of the 80s. I think that was Go West, wasn't it? Was that
Yes. Yeah.
So when you're in charge, of an entire shoot, a whole production like that, in a lot of ways you're the general contractor. So you've got to make sure that the lighting person's taken care of, all the different aspects of the business. And so they're expecting, I'm assuming, like a deposit?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm trying to play it cool with the folks back in Kansas City. Like, well, can we get 30%? And it's like, well, if you want to hold this, you're going to have to da-da-da-da. And I'm like,
oh my.
I'm like, I know it's Sprint. Like, it's all going to come down the line. And that's actually something I've carried through. I can't expect people now to go to the same lengths maybe I did, but it is a valuable skill to, as I've spent more time in the agency world and, you know, morphed into the guy on the couch with the keyboard, I hang on to that punching through a wall kind of thing. And for those that have only been in the corporate environment, let's say, that's where I'm grateful for the production past that I had, because we had to figure it out.
For sure.
Like, you have to.
It's very entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
As well. I mean, you're running your own business. Not only do you have to put out a great product and be creative, which is hard enough in and of itself, but you've got to run a business and take care of all the various contractors that are around you. So the Sprint, I'm assuming it all went great?
It did. And then what really struck me was that one of the main creatives, I guess, at Sprint, he changed his Facebook banner image to him on the trailer car. We had a Ford Bronco that was going down PCH right by the ocean out there in Malibu, and all of us on the back of it, like the picture car or whatever, right? It's really cool looking. That's what he changed his image to. And that's when it really and that stayed with me. Like, we just did a commercial shoot at Oxford Road. We do a little bit of television, and we had folks out. It's like, this is like going to Disney. There's an element of this you can't ever forget.
Sure.
And Jordan Brady's, credit it to him. There's the show in front of the camera, and there's the show behind the camera. And it's special. These guys, like, what are they doing all the time? Then they get to come out here and sit on one of those things on the 101 where they used to watch Baywatch and get to be on a car. Like, that is a cool, unique experience. And you got to remember that when you're putting all this stuff together as well.
That is so true. And I've honestly, I never thought of it that way. I was listening to Guy Raz interview the songwriter Ryan Tedder, and he was talking about just the challenge of being creative and, you know, trying to pump out music and create all the time. And in a lot of ways, that's what you're tasked with. You are tasked with creating. And he actually had to step away from it from a little bit because he just got so burned out. But he said, every time I go to sit down, my goal is to basically create goosebumps. That is what he's trying to do.
Yes.
And you're trying to do the same thing for advertisers and also for the clients that are watching or listening to that advertisement. That's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, you got to keep that. You need to remember the human experiential part. And then ultimately, yes, we're talking about the thing that we're putting out into the world. And I think that's a great benchmark is Goosebumps.
So you're out here, you're making it work. It sounds like it's obviously stressful. You're listening to Go West, driving back from Lancaster.
Dude.
And how did you and Dan Granger at Oxford Road get connected?
Yeah, so Dan and I go way back, actually. We knew each other from college. So we had been roommates, in fact, in college, not assigned, but by choice, because he had transferred out. And then he and I and a couple other guys all lived together. And then he and I just stayed close.
And this is at Azusa Pacific?
No, it was a school previous to that. I was at a school called Biola University.
Okay, got it.
Biola,
yeah.
In La Mirada.
Yeah.
And so that's where Dan and I knew each other from, and we had stayed close. And then he was doing his career at Clear Channel. And
that's where I met him.
Yes, yeah, okay. And he's like top salesman and of the year every year, but his story's also got its twists and turns and its ups and downs and all that stuff. But he was doing exceptional. And so I knew him. I was doing some work with some other folks. I wasn't doing any work with Dan, but we were close, and he's got a family, and we'd known each other a long time, and they're out in Valencia, which is where we live now. When we came out in 2012, it was like we looked at Valencia and Pasadena. Ended up going with Valencia. I like to run a lot, and the paseos there are perfect for that. And then Dan, just again, you look back at the trajectory, and now it looks like this straight line. Right. It's like, oh, this was all boom, boom, boom. Somebody is like, is there something going on I don't know about? It's like, yes, absolutely. Then Dan started to grow his clients at Clear Channel in this new thing called podcasts, right?
Sure.
And that continued to grow and expand at Oxford Road. And I'm already doing this freelance stuff, and I started doing some work with them. I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit.
No, that's okay.
Suppose. And then I just got to this inflection point where it was like Oxford Road crossed over 50%. They ended up leaving Clear Channel and starting Oxford Road. Dan did with the core team that are all still there. Gary and Miranda, Kyle Jelinek, myself, we've all been there the whole time. I was freelance at first. And it got to that inflection point where it became more than 50% of my business as Stew Redwine. And it was a decision point. I'd already broken through some barriers, like where it's like, I can't hire another producer. I can't hire an editor. And I remember this guy just looked at me and goes, you can't? And so I was growing, and then Oxford crossed over that line, which already 50% is pretty massive, right? It's like in general, we don't want somebody to be maybe more than 20% or something like that. But, so it just, Oxford's going like this rocket ship. And I just had that decision to go well, do I want to do my own thing and keep doing this thing, or do I hitch my wagon over here?
And Dan Granger's a good wagon to hitch yourself to. I have not known him as long, but I've known him for quite some time. And when he was an account executive, he just blew the doors off the place. And my 2 wives ago, but still very good friends, worked alongside him, Carrie, at KFI. And Carrie was a really good AE, but no matter what Carrie could do, Dan was like the Ohtani of being an account executive. He could pitch and he could hit. There was no stopping him. And it was fun to get to know him at that point. But you could tell early on that this guy was just going to be an absolute superstar. And I had kind of figured that he would either go on to be a Bob Pittman and run, Clear Channel,
exactly,
or now iHeart, or go out on his own. And it's incredible to see what he's accomplished. And so he's going to you and using your agency at this point and hiring you to do a lot of his projects, and it gets to a point where he becomes like your biggest client.
Exactly.
And he said, come on over.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. It wasn't actually Dan that hired me. It was at that time our managing director was Scott McDonnell, because Dan and I did have the pre-existing relationship. So it was like we've from the beginning had kind of these separations. Yeah, I mean, it just reached that point where it was, I feel like it was more from my side to go hey, I think I could just come join you guys, because it's like, let's face it, you've done it. I mean, this place is amazing, but it's like your response, it's finance, it's all of it. It's a business. It's all of it. And then there's a little slice where you get to do the thing.
Yes. That's a perfect
and that was
way
the
of
trade.
explaining it.
And that was the trade I made. I want to spend more time in a shop making widgets. I've always liked making widgets. So I got to trade for me. I got to trade that other stuff.
I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense, and you've had a tremendous amount of success doing it. And I'm going to get into some of the clients and so forth that you work with, but I get it, because now you can really focus on what you do best, which is being creative and putting out some, amazing commercials. Let's talk a little bit just what your role is specifically and what your day-to-day is as the VP of Creative Services at Oxford Road.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the head of the creative department, and the way that we've got it is we've got 3 full-time producers and then some freelance ones as well. We've got about 30 active engagements, different clients that work with us, like Shopify, NetSuite by Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John. All of them are placing media, and most of them, especially those on that list, they're doing creative with us as well. And so for their audio campaigns, what my team is doing is working with their team in a variety of capacities, from either at the very start, like working with them on strategy and devising an entire campaign, like we did this last summer with blinds.com, where we then deploy it across a ton of different channels. Or sometimes it's more executional, where it's like, hey, it's not a brief. It's like, hey, can you guys produce this script for us? And we go, yeah, sure, let's execute it, right? We also have a unique approach to creative messaging, persuasive messaging in audio, called Audiolytics, which is a system that we've developed over the years, where sometimes what we're providing is their team has created the work, and we run it through our 71-point inspection list that's based on media weighting of $100 million to go, hey, this is what you could do to improve your score, to potentially do better. You don't have to, but so maybe we're scoring stuff, maybe we're getting the brief, maybe we're just producing it, or maybe we're all the way at the beginning at the strategy. So all of that with the different clients is what I'm overseeing on a day-to-day basis.
That's a large role. And I'm assuming a lot of these large corporations have their own marketing directors, and they've got some vision and so forth, and you've got to go in. And I'm sure there's some egos involved as well when you're dealing, especially corporations of that size, and you've got to go in and kind of, with your Audiolytics, kind of give them some direction and how to improve maybe that their creative wasn't, or tell them that their creative wasn't the best. Yeah,
and it's been a delicate thing. I mean, for me, my ego is not my amigo. So it's funny. The conversation happened last week that I'd handled differently. Over the years of developing Audiolytics, and from my previous experience, a light meter is a light meter. Right? Click, F2.8. Click, F11. It's telling you what to do as the exposure. It's objective.
Sure.
And then what the DP does with that, do whatever you want. It's not a comedy. It's not science fiction. It's a metric. Getting people on board with that idea when it's your system and you're kind of grading your own homework, that's the thing I've had to evolve with. And I had a conversation just this last week where it's like, man, I came in too heavy on the score, and I could see the individual I was dealing with, they got into defensiveness. And then once they get into defensiveness, I've got to defend against this score, at least in my opinion. That game is over, because a person's gone into their lizard brain. That's like a 15-minute reset minimum if they've done any mindfulness work or whatever. If they're in, it's over. So the way I've found to deal with the egos, like you're saying, is like, you've got to get them to like you, and that they believe, and it needs to be true, that you believe in what they're doing, that you understand them. And you've got to like kind of slowly introduce that you've got this methodology and this score. And you can't even be like heavy-handed and going, because it works, I've got results I can point to. It's like, you've kind of got to it's got to be like this like no-sell environment where it's like, hey, we're also running Audiolytics on it. Your guys' scores are kind of right in the zone. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So can you, and then, but if you come out too hot and heavy with it,
it's really interesting. And they're obviously also your client, and you want to keep them as a client. You need them to be, you
want them on board with it because it helps them.
Yeah.
And if they don't see that it helps them, what's the point?
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you're almost like a therapist.
Completely.
Trying to.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. When you are in with the clients, I know a lot of them are all over the country, all over the world for that matter. Do you sometimes fly to go meet with them? Or they come in to see you, or this is over Zoom, or a combination of both?
That's been changing. I mean, like this, I'm here physically with you, where I feel like I'm seeing that that's the trend. Now, part of it, that's what I'm bringing to it, is that I physically want to be with people, but I would say that I am experiencing that people are wanting to come be in person.
That's great.
We went through that whole period where it's all Zoom all the time. Another thing that I'm experiencing is people are, and myself included, are like, I'd sooner get on a phone call than do a Zoom call. I'd rather do this, talk to you on the phone, but like Zoom is becoming less and less of a deal.
That's very interesting. I'm noticing the same. I think being on Zoom can be exhausting after a while. And it's tough at least in my mind, and even though our company is very much decentralized, but to ideate is difficult over Zoom. Oh. I think it's much easier to kind of riff in the creative process being together in one room.
I think so too, because I think the biggest enemy to creative ideation is fear. Okay. And being present with another human like this, open, can lower our fear a lot more, I think, than the Zoom situation. I think is triggering all kinds of fear responses.
Makes a lot of sense. Sure.
I think so.
Sure. Because the whole creative
they're
process.
in your face.
Yeah.
It's this close.
Yeah.
Like I would literally have to be knee to knee with you.
Yes.
And then you don't look away.
Right.
Or think about this. How good does this feel? I'm here in this room with you right now. Yeah, that's cool. Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking maybe we could do it like we could do it this way. Do you feel like I'm respecting you and connected to you? And
not at all. And I noticed that daily on Zoom.
Think about that.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that as well.
A person is standing this close to you and looking away from you. That has to be messing up what's going on in here.
I think so too. I didn't think about the fear process, but you're 100% correct. When you're putting yourself out there, from a creativity standpoint, you're putting your soul out there in a lot of ways. And
completely.
You're becoming vulnerable and you're putting yourself out there for someone to really kind of crap on your ideas. And that is very tough in a Zoom type setting. It's tough enough in a personal setting.
Exactly. I feel like, look, it's scary to be with people in person as well. I feel like the breakthrough can happen in person where, you can, something stupid, somebody drops something breaks the tension. And when you're in person, it's like that can, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're safe. We're connected now. This is good. Across Zoom land, it's like,
sure.
When does that snap happen? Sometimes it happens and we're connected, but I think it's much easier to connect like this.
When you're dealing with clients, and we were talking before you came in, we have a mutual friend, Craig Kitchen, who's just works with the biggest talent, Delilah, Sean Hannity. I mean, Craig is just, he was one of the founders of Premier Radio Networks, one of the godfathers of the business. When you've got a client that comes in and they are looking for an endorsement or a brand ambassador like a Ryan Seacrest or a Joe Rogan, how does that process come up? They usually come to you going, hey, I'm looking for Joe Rogan, or you will guide them into the right spokesperson?
Sometimes we have people come in, with their heart set on somebody specific. I would say most of the time it's about brands that are testing into audio or wanting to improve their performance in audio. And so it's kind of, in a sense, I guess I would say personality agnostic. And it's performance based. And I don't just mean short-term performance. I was listening this morning to a podcast and it was talking about performance versus brand. And for me, I just think of short-term versus long-term, right? So anyway, whoever the advertiser is, they've got certain goals they're trying to hit. And so what we're able to do is look across clients and across the whole portfolio to go, this mixture will help you achieve that goal. And then the personalities come into play. But sometimes, if somebody's coming in, they go, we really want to be on this specific program, then that's the mission, right? And we work towards that goal. Or we might challenge them to go like, we don't actually think that does make sense for that same amount of spend. Like you're seeing this stuff out right now where they're talking about Super Bowl spots. It's $7 million for a Super Bowl spot. But if you were to spend that on a podcast, you could get 300 million host-read 60-second ad impressions. So my point is, advertiser comes in, I want to be on Joe Rogan. It's like, okay, well, why? Let me understand and get into that. And let's say it's because they believe that it's going to help them achieve their performance goal. We might come back with a portfolio approach and go, hey, for phase one, actually, why don't we do this? establish a foothold in the channel, and Rogan will be phase 2 or phase 3. Do you know what I'm saying?
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kind of ease them, stair step it so it's not all at once.
Yeah, and putting it all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
It's like, how can we look across all of this?
Sure. And when you're dealing with talent of that stature, because these are all really big names that you deal with, are you guiding, when I say are coaching the talent a little bit, do you meet with them ahead of the time before they're actually doing the live endorsements or I shouldn't say live, the recorded endorsements?
Sure. I mean, it's good you said live because, that's actually been something in the space as well. Are they doing it right as they're doing the content, or did they pre-record it? But to answer your question, yes, and it's a real exercise in a couple of things. One is finding the deep personal connection between them and the brand, right? Like the most powerful words in the lexicon of advertising are "I use this and you should too," right? Like and they're using the words of their audience. But the biggest thing I think about when talking with talent is I think of Louis Armstrong and the way that he plays the trumpet with his and his big cheeks out there.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so we hired Louis Armstrong to come play the trumpet for us. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I wrote some Louis Armstrong kind of theme music. In fact, hey, Mr. Armstrong, can I just put my lips up there and try to get your mouth next to his and play? It's like, we can't write the copy like Howard Stern. Our best bet is to make sure we're providing more like 150 words, not 180 words for 60 seconds. How do we make every word there work as hard as possible to set him up to do what only he can do and get out of his way? So I always think of it as we're like guitar techs handing Prince a guitar.
Yeah.
And we need to bend our knee and bow our head and make sure that guitar is tuned and hand it to the master and let them do their thing. But that's more than just send them some copy points. You got to think about that.
Sure.
And really make that hit as hard as possible and then show up. I just did an onboarding last week with a massive talent. And we used to get them more. We don't get the talent quite as much. So you're working with a producer or somebody, right? Which is great. But I showed up with my homework done. I had a 3-page document of here's the copy points. Here's 6 different ways based on, I listened to his book. Yeah, I was listening to his book. I listened to his podcast. I watched his show. I did my homework. The reaction I get back from the guys, nobody does this. Nobody shows up like this.
No kidding.
They're people, man. It's show some respect.
And that's probably goes back to the producer in you and the fact that you put together, you were acting as where you were. You owned your own company, and a producer, you had to know it all.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned this earlier, just performance marketing versus brand building. And we've really seen, and we're nowhere near the level of you, but we produce a lot of radio commercials. Darren sitting across from me, him and his team do a phenomenal job. But we're not usually dealing with agencies. We're dealing usually with kind of account executives, and they're dealing with smaller, local radio markets. So they may come to us, and it could be an auto shop, and they're looking to sell tires and to move more tires, but they're obviously looking to, at the end of the day, to get as many people into their shop to buy new tires in the wintertime, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's a big trend right now that it's performance more so than brand building. Let's, if you don't mind, explain the difference, but what do you think is more important, and how do you balance that with the client itself?
Woo, yeah. So time horizon is my short answer. It's all a matter of how we're measuring success and how long do we have to get there. That's what I think of first, which is kind of okay, we'll answer my question. I think that your performance marketing, that's all about the short term, is that I'm trying to drive an immediate response. So tires, things like that, where I've got a promotion, I've got a special discount, I'm able to anchor off of events that are happening. That's my performance-based stuff to go, hey, is this working based on my KPI? Did I get the cash register to ring? Brand is, are we building this up over the long term so that people are making positive associations with my brand so they think of me first, they feel the best about me, and when they have need for me, that they will ultimately take action. And that's over a much longer time horizon. So you might use a metric like return on ad spend over a larger period than just looking at a short period of going, did we sell, how many sets of tires did we sell?
Do you have a hard time now? Have you noticed, just as every year marches on, that clients are more impatient for results than what, say, they were a decade ago, or do you feel it's kind of been the same?
I think there was a massive push because of digital where what they were able to do like on Facebook and stuff like that and get these immediate results back, that the short answer is yes, right? And I want my audio to work just like that. And I want to be able to get in there and see the results. And I would say, like, when we were starting the agency and for the first few years, it was a lot of that. There's a lot of folks out of like San Francisco, VC-backed companies, where they're wanting to see audio perform like digital, which is like change it on the fly, change it every day, make these optimizations. Is this working? And, audio's difficult when it comes to that. What's interesting is I see some of that's going away on the digital side with the iOS changes. And then you see that people are, I mean, like I said, I just heard it this morning, is that since 2022, more advertisers are looking at long-term benefits at brand advertising, because what can happen is when you get so myopic and focused on performance only, right? Like instantaneous performance, you can like optimize yourself out of a channel. You can optimize yourself out of a campaign, as opposed to I need to open up the window and let this breathe. And I would say that I'm seeing more, to answer your question. I think it got really like white hot. The iOS changes kind of actually helped to where then people are now opening up, going like, oh, let's broaden our time horizon and look at performance over a longer window than over just the next week.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and then isn't Google making those same changes that iOS, that Apple made a year or two ago?
Yeah, there's tons of changes going on where it's just not what it used to be, where they used to be able to, track every little bit of it.
In terms of privacy, which makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. I saw that Acast, it was about a week or so ago, said that 99% of U.S. marketers think that podcast ads are effective. Do you believe that?
99% of marketers, but do I believe that podcast ads are effective? You bet.
And
yes, sir. 100% of Stew Redwines. 100% of Stew Redwines, and there's only one of me. Believe. Not only believe, have experience and can testify that podcast ads are effective. That is super high. That's great to hear. I mean, we keep hearing more and more stuff about the efficacy of audio and people seeing just how powerful it is. And so, no, that doesn't surprise me.
It also goes on to say that 88% of shoppers are very likely to be happy with purchases that they made after hearing products advertised in a podcast. So there's also a very high degree of, satisfaction, consumer satisfaction. And I was wondering, because I remember back, it's been several years since I worked at a radio station, but I do remember that those endorsed spots that the air talent would read, the Ellen K's of the world or the Rick D's, whoever it may be, but there would always be, or I would say always, but most of the time there was more response to those live endorsements versus the pre-recorded spots. Do you find that as well with the podcasts?
Yeah, and in fact, there was just a study that was put out talking about even that the longer that the host goes, the more effective the ad is, because it's that personal connection. Now, like, we're getting down to what makes audio work, right? When we're born, our hearing is fully developed. It develops at like 20 weeks. Our vision doesn't even fully develop until 2 to 3 years old. Our hearing is always on, constantly on. It's 360 degrees. It's our fastest sense. So if you think about that, that means every other input that you get sensory is colored by the sound first. It's processed in the exact same part of the brain where emotions are processed. When I close my eyes and I listen, it is a super highway to my heart. All right. And so with these hosts, that connection, massive, massive. Then you get into Aristotle's view of persuasion, pathos, ethos, and logos. You've got feelings. People feel good about these hosts. You've got reason, whatever reason they're giving them about the ad that they're talking about, the product or service. But then you've got ethos, which is the third leg of the persuasive stool. And sometimes we've reduced this conversation down to just those two, feeling versus thinking, like rational versus irrational, sadly. There's this third leg of that stool, and it's trust in the source. And so, of course, you're walking around, this person's in your ear. Like, you feel like they're right next to you. You trust them. You listen to them for hours on end. So you better believe when they go on and on about something and what it's done for them, that is like blows away all other advertising channels.
And in the ads that we just saw in the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago, we saw a lot of celebrities tied in, whether it was Jennifer Aniston, we saw Beyonce, we saw Jennifer Lopez. And that's right, Arnold. Does that go back to that? Even though those aren't endorsements per se, or not, I guess they are endorsements, but they're not literally reading the copy like a podcast host would, but that goes back to the trust that we have in those celebrities.
Completely transfer of trust, and then also emotional imprinting. You feel good about them. You feel like you know them. You know what that's like. I mean, especially for those of us that have lived out here. And then it's what keeps me from walking up to a celebrity, because I'm like, I feel such fondness for Jack Black. I saw him at the ArcLight, right? We were the only two people there. It was like 10 o'clock, 9 in the morning maybe. I'd done my workout, and I walked in the lobby of the ArcLight to see what was playing later, because when we were building the agency, we were at the CNN building in Hollywood.
Okay.
I'd drive down at 6 in the morning or whatever, 5, I don't remember, work out. Then I'd go to Oxford Road and I would work until all hours. You forget it. So I'd watch movies at 11 o'clock at night, because it was like, screw, everybody's asleep anyway. So I walk in there and there's Jack Black. I feel like I know him. I feel very good about him. Maybe I kind of love him. Right? That's freaky. He doesn't know me. Man, he's waiting to get a special screening, I think. When I put it all together, I bet there was like a Kurt Cobain documentary. And I'm like, I bet you anything he was getting a private screening of that. I don't know. My point is, all of that, you put a celebrity in an advertisement, all of that transfer fits. Now, it's not just, you can't, just sledgehammer it. Like, it needs to make sense and fit. That's where I think the Arnold one with the neighbor,
right?
I really liked that, because it's like a good neighbor. State Farm is there. So I like that they have Sonic branding.
Sure.
Okay. And then they were anchoring off of that, anchoring off of his way that he pronounces words. And it all like really worked together, as opposed to like the Mr. T Skechers one.
Yeah.
Where there's a T in Skechers. Like, that felt more ham-fisted than the Arnold one did to me.
I agree. And at the very end of the State Farm, they brought around Danny DeVito from Twins, which was so well done. Yeah.
He's like, neighbor. I mean, it's so fun.
Ad Infinitum is your podcast, which is incredible. Highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're in the production, the creative side, because it really is all about creating incredible production and creativity. I was listening to your episode 6, and you had some awesome lessons I'd love for you to share about offer, scarcity, and path. Do you mind sharing that a little bit?
Not at all. I mean, it's funny you say that, because every year, we didn't do it this year, but every year for many years, we would watch the Super Bowl in real time and have graders using our Audiolytics system, and then had partnered with Business Insider to reveal our scores. And I can't help myself. I got my journal here. You can see, like, when I watch the Super Bowl, I still grade all the ads.
Oh my, I love that.
Using Audiolytics.
You've got like 6 or 7 pages.
Yes.
Of all
and I got the breaks, because I'm like, I can't, it's like when it's training. Anyway, the main thing I was looking for in them is like, so the 9 key components of Audiolytics are setup, value prop, positioning, demonstration, substantiation, offer, scarcity, path, execution. Most Super Bowl spots, the only place in that matrix that they're going to be missing, I'll just like fast forward, is offer, scarcity, and path, probably positioning. Like, they've got like substantiation, they're in the Super Bowl. That's called costly signaling.
Okay.
So that already substantiates. And then they're going to do something else. They're going to have a celebrity, most likely, unless you're Team U and you're just going to pugilize us with your ad. But,
which ran like 3 or 4 times.
Well, and I can remember it.
Yeah.
I mean, but offer, scarcity, and path, a couple of the ones that like I highlighted was the NFL Sunday Ticket. They had a special offer. You also had a TurboTax. I actually signed up for TurboTax and started using TurboTax because in response to that Super Bowl ad.
No kidding.
I've actually completed my taxes, guys.
Good. Well done.
Thank you. I know. I was that fast. I was like, this is great. But to break it down, like, offer, scarcity, and path is your offer is like, why, especially if, again, we got to go to time horizon. Okay, so do I need these people to act right now? Then I'm going to deploy different kinds of tactics in my offer. I need to do an offer that's limited in time. You can save on the snow tires, but that's already timed to the weather or whatever, but only through March 31st. And then you want your media to match up with that. That's the scarcity component. But an offer can also be a guarantee, and a guarantee is evergreen. But like, what is it that's going to cause them to take action now? So that's where, in using the Audiolytics framework and applying it to a shorter time horizon, which is what it was initially built within, that's really where offer, scarcity, and path come out to go, okay, why would I train my, dollars for your offer, for what you're offering me right now? Like, what's compelling, what's interesting that would make me to do it now, as opposed to if I'm doing more brand or long-term, I don't necessarily have to have an offer. And then scarcity, you want to have organic, you want to have authentic scarcity. It needs to be true and real, that you're building up to a specific end date, your media would match with that, and that truly that it goes away. Okay. And then path is just about making it as clear as possible as to where a person needs to go to transact with you. And I actually think that's something like watching foreign Super Bowl commercials. Well, where do I get Pringles? Do I need to tell people where to get Pringles? Now, one might immediately go, no. Like, I question that. What does it hurt?
Right.
What does it hurt to tell them exactly where you need? Make sure to get a can at your local convenience store. Well, that's ridiculous. Everybody knows that. In my experience, most of the time, any statement that's pretty, everybody knows that. It's like, I don't think they do. What does it hurt to be clear? That was something that I really liked about T-Mobile, is they at least kept their name up there for the entire spot. Remember, they did the spot that had the auditions?
Yeah.
What was cool is they put a lower third on that spot. And most people are like, ugh, like, I don't want to do it. That looks like a direct response commercial. Like, look. I was like, that's awesome. So that whole time you're watching it, you're seeing T-Mobile, T-Mobile, T-Mobile. Now, is that a path as in go to your local T-Mobile store? No, but I do give them some points for that in the sense of they're making it so clear. Their name is so clear throughout there as well.
Right. You can't confuse it with AT&T or...
I know, and they did a lower third in kind of a clever way. But in brief, it's like offer is, okay, why you? Like, why you? Why should I do this with you? Scarcity is why now? Why should I do it now? And path is, where do I go? Make it easy for me. Reduce friction.
What percentage of spots that you hear on the air or via podcast or on television incorporate those key components?
I would say probably, most of your response ads are going to have a lot of them. And then there's a whole question of the ninth component of Audiolytics is execution, which is how well you did. How did you say it? But on the air, I would say it's probably 70-30, something like that.
Okay.
70 towards they're trying to do something to compel you to take action right now when you're talking in audio, because I think audio is kind of built for it. With retail and then the folks that are on the digital side of audio and podcast, they're trying to get you to come to some attributable path so that they can prove the thing works. But we're seeing more brand dollars go in, and I feel like you can probably do a simple comparison of as it's more of a brand spend, the clarity of the path is going to probably get diluted, and your offer, scarcity, and path are going to get diluted as you go more brand.
Interesting. I heard on your most recent episode, you were comparing McDonald's spots with Brian Cox, and you had two other creative directors on with you from some agencies. And it was interesting that someone even like McDonald's, who knows how to create great creative, and you were talking all about the I'm loving it and what a phenomenal mnemonic that was, that even their creative still missed some of the components that they should have had.
Yeah, and I think that's where I go back to my light meter. Okay. So it's like, what is perfect exposure for this spot right here? It's like, well, perfect exposure to correctly expose everything right now, it's going to be 2.8. Okay, great. Well, I don't want to perfectly expose everything because I want them to feel, it needs to feel more moody. So that's where we have to be delicate with the tool to go sometimes. And we do this with advertisers, not sometimes, we do this with advertisers that, yes, the benchmark of this model for perfect exposure for a perfectly crafted, persuasive audio message is a 90% score in Audiolytics. It's not even 100%. It's 90%. But for you guys, based on your goals and what we're trying to do here, our target for your campaign is actually 72%.
I see.
So
I
it's
see.
not-
Because if you
that's-
got too high, sometimes you'd lose the story, or you would lose a particular emotion, whatever it may be.
Yeah, or they're just not going to do. We're not going to do We're not going to do a limited time offer. Not that you have to do a limited time offer to get off for scarcity and path, but or like let's say one of the most highly weighted subcomponents in the 71 subcomponents is a founder or company spokesperson, where we're talking about, okay, well, you can't always do it. So an ad with a score of like 90%, you could theoretically get to 100%. I would have to have a celebrity in it. I would have to have a company's part of me wants to make 100% ad just because it would kind of be like, it'd be so ridiculous. Hi, my name, whatever. It's like, you got the founder, got a celebrity. It's like, this is overload. And you can only get this by the end of this ad.
Do you A/B test spots much, where you'll do a few different versions and kind of see which one performs better, but put them out there?
Absolutely. We do both pre-market testing and in-market testing, and that's very powerful. The pre-market testing I find is very helpful for when you're taking really big swings, because you can like validate with a group. Let's say we're using Veritonic, right? And then you've got a group of, let's say it's 300 people that are statistically significant sample, whatever that would be for your audience. So I'm not a statistician or whatever, but Veritonic is awesome. So they figure that part out. And then if you're going to do that, it's like, in my opinion, show them something wildly different to kind of give yourself the courage to go ahead and proceed with taking that to market. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Okay, so like, let's say we wanted to do a musical spot, and then no, we want to just do straight reads. Like, let's see how they react to that pre-market. Now, that's not always exactly what's going to happen in market. In market, what's cool is with the generative AI tools that are being developed, and I think something that's important to keep in mind, particularly when it comes to cloned voices, which is like, I think it's like, we got to come up with a different name. Those are human actors, human talent, that it's a human voice. It's just like samples, like music samples,
Right.
instrument samples. You've got the hi-hat, the bass drum, and then you put it together. Anyway, you've got those human voices. Because of that, you can do a test where, let's say you've got customized creative for all 50 states, which we've done.
No kidding.
And 4 different versions of the ad.
Holy moly.
Yeah. And you can see. And you also kind of gotta go, like I said, you can optimize yourself like out of something, or it's easy to go overboard with that. So you want to make sure you're testing something meaningful. Not just to go, well, if we could do 4 spots in all 50 states, why can't we do 40? And it's like, well, like, why? Like, what are we trying to learn? So to answer your question, it's, pre-market testing, which I think has its merits, particularly if you're going to take big swings. Because I was just reading or listening to something where it's like funny. It's like the longer people work on a project and they're solely focused on a single thing. Oh, it was an interview with the Made Music guy. Made Music as the sonic branding guys. They did AT&T. And he was talking about how you stay up till 3 a.m, let's say, working on a song. And you're like, man, that's like, we tried this and we tried that, like these really big, like different changes. And then when you get a good night's sleep and you come back to it, you realize the differences weren't that big because you were so far up the thing that like, you're like, maybe if we did E versus E minor. So it's like on your creative also, it's like you got to think like, changing 2 lines in the middle of a script that's read by the same voice. That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes we overthink it and get too specific.
So that's for testing. You could do that though. So that's what's like, you've got to keep in mind with these tools is one could do that. One could do 500 versions of a script. Sure. Changing 1 line. And well, what difference does it make? I want to see what difference it makes. It's like, hey, how about we do something that's massively different and see if we get a sign of life that way.
Dan, coming from radio, Craig, who I know does some work with you guys, Craig Kitchen, coming from radio. It is 2-part question here. Part 1 is, how is the creative different from a radio spot to a podcast spot? And then 2, why do you decide to put a client into one or the other?
In general, podcast inherently has been host read. That's what comes to mind. Now that's changing. The breaks are changing. it's kind of like as kids grow up, they're like, I'm never going to be like my dad, and then you look in the mirror and you see your dad. Yeah. And you say exactly what he says and you laugh at the same things he laughed at. Yeah. So like podcast is kind of turning into dad.
Okay.
And that's not all bad. Dad learned a lot over the last 100 years.
Right.
Okay. So the breaks are getting more full and more brand dollars are coming in. As that's happening, like I'm listening every week to new advertisers, and I listen to a lot of podcasts as it is. You're hearing more produced spots. But I'd say in general, when you're thinking of even a marketer coming to the table, those 99% of people that believe in it, what's in their mind, I'm guessing, is a host they like giving a full-throated endorsement and talking for 3 minutes about how much they love MeUndies.
Right.
Like, that's what they're thinking, podcast. Okay. Well, that's been going on in radio the whole time. It's like, nevertheless, radio, I think most people are thinking spots and dots, produced spots, high volume, and some element of either local promotional type stuff. You've got your talent, perhaps reading, maybe doing some pre-records. But I'd say for the large part, if you're going to ask people, like, what's a radio spot? It's like progressive that's got some kind of skit that's going on. And then that's going to be followed by a Kohl's commercial telling me that President's Day sale is coming up. And then I'm going to hear 1-800-CARS for kids.
That's pretty good. That's pretty much a stop sign.
Did I just do it? Okay. 1-877-CARS for kids.
That's right.
With a comedy K.
Tell me a little bit about when a client comes in and how you advise them towards, we now have all these content creators and social influencers that clients spend money on. Obviously, all the linear media, TV, radio, like we just talked about, print. I can't believe with the election coming up, how much print I'm getting in my mailbox every single day. I'm no joke. There's 4 or 5 probably different local mailers for assembly person or senator, or, local proposition. How do you look at that mix ultimately for an advertiser?
It's a great question. And the thing is, first thing I'd say is we do look at the mix. We back away to we want to know as much about the entire comm system and their business goals, the biggest picture possible, to see where audio fits into that. Whether or not we'll help them in those different channels, sometimes that is the case, but I'd say sometimes with specialist agencies, I don't really know. I know Oxford Road, right? Because I haven't worked at another agency. I know that we take that into account. We want to look at the entire comm system and what is the strategy and what are your goals to go, okay, how does this ladder up into, and for instance, hey, what's your TV stuff? Cool. Recently we've been doing more of this. Can we license that track? Oh no, they can't, because you get a no, get your first no. It's like, well, we've seen a correlation between matching the music, which intuitively this makes sense, right? From your television campaign and your digital, whatever you're doing in digital, with your audio. Because the mind is tracking with that. The human mind is tracking with that. Make no mistake. So can we get those to work together? Or to your point, print stuff. I can remember when we were working with HelloFresh, like I got a HelloFresh meal because we advertise products that we use and would use if we could, but for the most part we use and believe in ourselves. So I'm getting my HelloFresh meal and it had this card and I can't remember what was on it, but it was a fantastic copy line. But like the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing. So it's like, how can we try to get everybody to communicate, take a look at that big picture? And then you had asked earlier, like, well, then how do you decide which channel to go into? And ultimately that's going to go roll back up to our goals to go like, okay, like customer acquisition costs or whatever other kind of KPIs that they might have, to go, what's the right fit? Like, is radio the right fit or is podcast the right fit? There's a lot of work that goes into making that recommendation. But many times when somebody's coming in, they already kind of have an idea of which audio channel they're thinking about.
Podcasting feels like it's exploded, even though it's been around for a long time. It feels like just over the last few years, and then especially when the pandemic came along, it became all of a sudden top of mind. Mm-hmm. Do you see it continuing to grow, or is it starting to level off a little bit?
Continuing to grow, no question. it's going to continue to grow. And that's, in the trades and everything, what everybody is predicting. And I think, you're going to continue to see radio kind of atrophy. But I think that's probably the rest of my career is going to be watching that shift.
Sure.
I don't think it'll be tectonic or swift. I think the newspapers, or I think of live theater, I think of any changing of how people receive what they want to receive to be entertained and educated and, whatever, that's going to continue to shift. But podcast, like you said, has exploded, will continue to grow. Like, there's no question. And then the thing I wonder about a lot is just radio. Like, what is it going to look like with radio as things continue to change?
Yeah, I think with any linear medium, and television has certainly seen erosion, print, and we see the struggles that, the LA Times has had, and there's definitely an evolution, and the fragmentation has, I think will continue to do so. I think radio, and I mostly talk to radio people, really needs to do a better job in investing in talent and creating content and engaging content. And so I think to some degree it's been a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think if you put phenomenal talent on the air, I feel like if Howard Stern left Sirius XM and moved back to terrestrial radio, people would listen to terrestrial radio,
right,
because it's where Howard Stern is. I think you're going to seek out the talent. You're going to seek out the most engaging hosts. You're going to go listen to Conan on, or you saw Sirius just buy the Smartless, which was really interesting. They bought Conan's show, which are both very successful podcasts. We saw Joe Rogan just do a new deal with Spotify. But I found it interesting, and I'm sure you saw this, that now you're going to be able to get Rogan's show outside of Spotify.
Exactly.
And so I'm assuming they're doing that because they want to be able to monetize the spots outside of just Spotify.
Well, and it's interesting to me. Yeah, of course. I think, more opportunities to monetize it, that we went so digital and specialized. And I just think sometimes I like talking to my grandkids about it. And then it's like we're swinging back to broadcast.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And it's like broadcast is actually a farming word.
Is it?
Yes, it's to cast your seed broadly.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's what it is. That's what it's from.
Wow.
They had broadcasters to throw the seed as far as possible. Yeah, that makes sense, right?
It does.
Or I can go narrow. This ad is just for you.
Right.
And it's like there's even like an uncanny valley bit to that like, and there's stuff coming out about that like we're not actually all that crazy about that. It's better to go, hey, can I do a general message that connects with people emotionally and I reach as many people as possible, right? That's Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow, his like seminal work that lots of folks are excited about and now has been out, for quite a while. So it's people are getting on board with this idea is like, this is about reaching as many new people as possible with my message, with as much fame, fluency, and feeling as possible, right? Which is all based on this behavioral science stuff of that it feels good, the affect heuristic. Fluency it's like the processing fluency heuristic. It's that you recognize them. And then fame, I can't remember which heuristic it is, but it's that you know them. That like Ford Motor Company.
Right.
I know Ford Motor Company. That's taking up space in your brain. Do you recognize Ford Motor Company? And what I'm talking to people more about is, do you recognize Ford Motor Company with your eyes closed? That's the question. Can I recognize them? Do they have a sound? Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Neighbor! Like I recognize that with my eyes closed. That's, as audio is continuing to grow, that's a question for marketers is, can they recognize you with their eyes closed?
That's phenomenal. And back to, I think it was the latest episode you did about the McDonald's, the I'm Loving It. And the agency in Germany that created that. And immediately with your eyes closed that I'm Loving It is McDonald's.
There you go.
Where do you see the next decade going in terms of podcasting?
Where I see the next decade going in terms of podcasts, I think a couple of things are going to happen. I think there's going to be like niche, specialized, whether or not the way that they're delivered via RSS, I don't even know if that matters. So the delivery mechanism, but like what is a podcast? It's an audio show. So where do I see audio shows going is I think you're going to see higher and higher production value of people wanting to do like really specialized audio content. I think you're going to see increasing video components with podcast. I think the driverless car is going to change everything. I still have to see right now when I drive. And that's been a huge piece of like Americana, right? Let's all get in our car. We drive, we go boom, turn on the radio, but you have to watch the road. Once you don't have to do that, it's going to be interesting for the audio space. I think also with podcasts, you're going to see a ton of generative AI stuff. I think you're going to see it get increasingly localized. Local podcasts, you're already seeing that. Yeah, those would be the big things. I think localization, high production value, and then the question of what is a podcast or what isn't a podcast. I don't know. I think you're going to see more fiction stuff for children.
Advice for people that want to get into podcasting and want to get into working as a creative director such as yourself.
You won't know it at the time, but you'll get there one mistake at a time. And
I love that advice you gave out at the beginning in terms of your buddy who had said, just call.
Call people. Yeah, no, I have some legit advice. I mean, look, I remember when things got really tough at one point, I called my dad. I was like, hey, I'm thinking about taking a job at FedEx. He goes, don't do that. He goes, whatever you do, keep taking stuff in the direction you're going. So I would think really hard about, what is it that you want? Where is it that you're headed? Even if it's in general, but it's like, I'm a maker. I want to make things. Okay. Or like, let's say I'm talent. I want to be the main event. I want to be the one on the stage. That's a whole other thing, right? That's everything. I'm not the right guy to ask about that. But to get to, let's say you want to be a creative director, I would continue to take jobs that are at least pointed in the general direction, right? But it can be across different channels or whatever. I'm just thinking back on myself. But I think you're exactly right. I can't thank Scott Jolly enough, I guess. It's like, I wrote down here, ring the phone on a schedule. That's really it. Show up, be nice, work hard, and don't worry about, I tell people all the time, because I'll have like, college kids or whatever reach out to me, and I'm like, hey, hit me up next week. They don't. I'm like, dude, 99% of life is showing up. Just show up and then keep trying. I do think you do need to kind of try to stay within a general lane. Do you know what I'm saying with that?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. That's, I think, phenomenal advice. This is a bonus question for you. What brand can you point to and say to yourself or look at them and go, that is just, they've done such an incredible job of branding. They're creative, and I know not all of them can hit, just like your audio analytics can't be 100 all the time. But what do you look at? Like, I look at the Nike Jumpman, and the fact that, Jordans are just as relevant today as they were in the 80s when I was a kid, when they came out, is really a testament to that brand. Even baseball players and sporting equipment from other sports has that Jumpman on it.
Yes, and that's an incredible story in and of itself. I'd say, the first one that always jumps in my mind with audio is Home Depot, because I love that their riff. Uh-huh. I love that they're committed to that. It feels right for like getting stuff done.
Right.
But if I think about it, one that I really like, I like McDonald's. And I just dug in on McDonald's, so that's why that's like, you're asking me today
sure
what my favorite is, because I think they get what they're doing. They're making everyday feel-good moments for people, right? And they're doing the celebrity meals that really taps into, we all have our own like weird, quirky ways. Like, I know I get a double quarter pounder plain,
right,
and I layer fries on it. Like, that's my thing. Like, we've all got that, and they've dug into that fan truth. I like the thing they did recently with the eyebrows, with what makes your arches raise. And then through it all, they've stayed committed from a sonic standpoint to that Sonic brand. So it's one that you can recognize with your eyes open. It's the yellow and the red. And with your eyes closed, it's ba 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 da da da. I'm loving it. So that would be my answer for you. The golden arches.
Bonus question number 2. And I'm sorry, I should have asked this early, but you just brought it up, and I heard you'd mentioned in audio or in ad infinitum, the importance of a mnemonic. And would you, I think you think they're important, as you just explained there with McDonald's, but would you recommend a smaller advertiser, smaller client that is just on a local level using one?
Absolutely. We've all got a mnemonic, right? The first one out of the gate, Stew.
Oh, your name.
Our names.
Yeah.
We're trained to respond to sounds, right? And there's like, I can't remember this stat exactly, but it's in the upper 80s. You can look on Made Music site to look for it, of the subconscious connection that we make between wanting to do an action or not based on the sound associated with it.
No kidding.
Ring the bell, the dog salivate. It's horrible actually how Pavlov treated those dogs. You don't want to get to, like, go look that up. It's the worst. Nevertheless, any of us that are dog owners, it's training. You absolutely should have a mnemonic, like no question. Now, I need a physician heal thyself, right? Does ad infinitum have a mnemonic? But I also wanted to say there was a study that was done with Odyssey and Veritonic where ads, both podcast and radio ads that included sonic branding, right? So a sound mark that you can recognize that you associate with the brand, have double-digit increases in ad recall and single-digit increases in purchase intent. So just as far as like, it's not just saying, oh, you should do that. Like the data, as more people are looking into audio, like it has a strong impact on your performance because again, it's that processing fluency. It's like, do I think of them? I've got to advertise a lot to make me think of them. Okay, do I think of them? That's fame. Processing fluency, did I recognize them? Well, if I'm always making the same noise, right. You know, bup with T-Mobile, or if I'm bum with NBC
or
right.
Netflix. I feel with the streaming now, we've all gotten so much more, or HBO with their static.
The Static Angel is a great one. Like,
yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you have that in the mix? Now, I also want to say, like, for local stuff, okay, is somebody's, come on down, or your mattress is free. Like, that's a mnemonic.
It's true. That's
it's
a really good point.
So like you sometimes, that was something we worked with some advertisers were like, your founder's voice, if you think about what does it make to make a sonic logo, it's like, well, it's distinct, right? It's memorable. It's, nothing else is like it. Well, that's a human voice, or it can be.
Yeah.
So, it's like, you don't want to get too like focused in on it, but if you can associate a noise or a specific line or a melody with your brand in your audio advertising, that's something we're pushing everybody to do, and something we're doing as well is like if they have an app that has a noise that they make, I mean, you guys, it blow you guys away, but it's like we'll send a sound effect to a podcast show and we're like, hey, can you incorporate that in the live read? And it's like I'm talking to the producer guy and they're like, oh man, I don't know, we can't, because of this and that. I'm like, look down at the board. You have a board in front of you. So what I need you to do is, but do we get 100% compliance? No, but it takes a little bit of doing because it is a pain in the neck, right?
Sure.
Like, okay, I have this new sound file and I got to make sure I did. But we get them to incorporate, okay, already people are using the app and hearing that noise, positive association. Let's give them another hit in the live read.
You said something very profound, at least to me, but you're 100% right about a voice, and it makes me think of it's time for Dodgers baseball. Vin Scully is the mnemonic for the Dodgers.
Exactly. And that's big. I think it's important to remember that the human voice can be your thing. That's okay. Like that could be your thing. But if you can develop a sound, I think you can you can outsmart your common sense on the sound stuff. You got to really be thinking about, like, to me, you're talking about the streamers. Like Netflix kind of owns it. Like, can you make a noise I'm sure you've heard the noise for Apple TV. I can't.
Yeah.
They all, to me, are
right.
They're all trying to be Netflix.
Yes. HBO is the only one I can.
Exactly. And that was because that was 1,000 years ago. Yeah. And it was actually making a point about what HBO was, from to clear, because it's cable.
Yep.
So it's like, don't just follow the herd. Like if you're going to do something with it, like do something.
The voice thing, and I know he's no longer there, but I always think of Men's Warehouse. I guarantee it.
Yes. Okay.
And it's hard. He's not been there for probably 5 years or whatever.
And that's an offer as well.
Yeah.
And substantiation. Like that's a really good, that's great. If you can say that, you have the person themselves getting up there and saying, come transact with me. I guarantee that it will work. And if it doesn't, I'll give you your money back. Like, fantastic.
Some great advice. Stu, this has been an absolute pleasure. Highly recommend. Please check out Audio Infinitum. If you are a producer, if you are at an agency, if you are just on the creative side of the business, you will absolutely love it. It's really the only, I think the only podcast out there that's about the execution of commercials and creative.
Yeah, it's the only one that's solely devoted to audio ads. So across all channels, that is the case. And it's interesting. You're seeing other stuff popping up out there, like the Make Better podcast they had us on. And we were discussing podcast ad infinitum's remit's a little bit wider of going like, let's look across all audio. And I think the thing that's so fascinating to me, and it goes back to my roots, like practical roots as a producer of like, how are we going to set up for the shot in the next room in 15 minutes? It's like, I want to hear a real ad and have a real conversation about what's really out there and talk about what could make it better, why it's working. Like, let's talk about the real thing.
Which I think is never, when we were talking about the fragmentation earlier, it's never been more important to have a creative that stands out. If you look back at the early days of distribution, where there was just print, there was only one channel and then maybe a couple of television and then radio. And so now there's so many different channels and so many different places to go and consume content. If your commercial's not sticking out, I think you're doing yourself a gigantic disservice. So.
Absolutely.
Stu, thank you very much. This has been an absolute pleasure and appreciate you coming in to be on the show. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Executive producer, Darren Silva. Producer and editor, Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator, Estefania Padilla. Marketing and distribution, Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.